Listen, man, I got mind control over Debo. So by now, I'm sure you guys are more than familiar with the advantages of one having their hands in Magecraft, but there's another set of abilities that we've yet to really get into, that being the abilities of the psychics. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. So essentially, the psychics are yet another mystery that you can see alongside Magecraft, but they operate in a completely different way. For starters, unlike Magecraft, which is something that you can learn and build upon, in order to be a psychic, you have to have this as a part of your background already. You have to be born with it. In that sense, it's the same as somebody being gifted in Magecraft. Even if that means that you didn't have the set of abilities at first and you awaken them later on in your life, like the Shikis for example, even if your abilities are dormant and you have them influenced by Magecraft, you can still only bring those psychic abilities to the forefront if they're already present. So with that in mind, they're very rare and they're very valuable to many sets of families that you might see throughout the verse. The Demon Hunter families in particular, we've been through some of those. The Ryogis, the Nania, the Fujo, the Asakami, all of these families are ones who thrive on psychic ability. The Nanias, for example, they have the Pure Eyes, which allows them to gauge the paranormal in an inhuman way. They also have the above human reflexes and the superhuman power. And at a time, it was important that these families kept these abilities in rotation so they can hunt down the mixed bloods with greater ease. The Nanias, for instance, they would only inbreed just to keep their family pure. That's how serious they were about keeping their abilities and making sure that their descendants still maintain those psychic aspects, because it doesn't take much to dilute the bloodline and then the powers start to wear thin. Same thing with the Ryogis and them having their split personalities to maximize their ability in different roles. So when it comes to the psychics, the proper name would be them having extra sensory perception, or in other words, ESP. That's just to say that they have the natural inborn range to perceive things that's outside of human nature. So they're technically operating with an additional sense. As of late, we've gotten more into things like the Mystic Eyes, but even with those, one thing to point out about them, originally the Mystic Eyes were set to be a psychic ability, and it was years later that they started to be manufactured by people that use Magecraft, or they had some type of other influence inside them that push that human boundary. Dead Apostles, for instance, if you were somebody who was turned, or you turn yourself through Magecraft, you can manufacture Mystic Eyes that way, and they're usually still classified as psychic. But if you're a true ancestor like Arkawade, then you were just born with them, and abilities like hers can't be manufactured, at least in the same way. You may see some like the Mystic Eyes that Ilya has. She has Mystic Eyes of Binding. She was able to hold Shiro in place in the Fate route. You may see some on a lower scale like hers, but it's still not going to be anything like the originals. And that's the reason why when people purchase eyes from the Mystic Eyes collection train, where you can buy a pair of Mystic Eyes at a real hefty price there, the reason that there's no guarantee that they'll even work in your favor is because they're not supposed to be connected to you in the first place. They're supposed to be connected to whatever being or whatever psychic that they came out of. That's why it's much more likely that your body would accept a pair of Mystic Eyes that were produced by Magecraft as opposed to the OGs that came out of a psychic that would literally drive you insane. If you remember us going into Galvaroso, who was the head mafia boss in Strange Fate, who was the leader of the Sclaudio family, he was one of the people that purchased the Mystic Eyes. He used his massive amount of wealth as a mob leader to get a hold of a pair himself from the Mystic Eyes train. And what ended up happening was, when he got them implanted, they didn't function the way that they were supposed to. They were Mystic Eyes that allowed him to peer into the future, but the future that he saw was one that was set on an infinite loop. So as much money as he spent, as dangerous as this operation was, it ended up being fruitless for the most part, because after he used it one time, it didn't work again. And that just speaks to how connected psychic abilities are to the person that they function in. OG mystic eyes are just one of many. So the same way that a magus has these magical circuits going throughout their body, a psychic has ESP circuits that's specifically designed and catered to them. And speaking of his mystic eyes, one of the many types of psychic abilities that you'll come across is precognition, which is the ability to look into the future in some type of a way. This isn't just a power that's exclusive to mystic eyes. When you think about characters like Tsiah, for example, remember how we went over the fact that a big part of the Atlas Academy is that their magical circuits aren't that great. But you notice that this still doesn't stop Tsiah for being a genius, whether that be in Melty Blood or whether that be in Grand Order. She's able to use her innate talents to stretch out the abilities of these mystic codes, to stretch out the abilities of her background. On some levels, she's a psychic. Where do you think these innate abilities are coming from? And she's not the only one. Another person that's able to look into the future is Kamekura, who is one of the people that Ryogi went against. He doesn't have mystic eyes in particular, but he does have ESP circuits within his eyes that allows him to shape the future. So his right eye has a precognition that allows him to calculate the future that's within his means. And then his left eye allows him to give that form through a defined set of circumstances. For example, if he's been at a location for a certain amount of time, he can map the road to the future itself based on what he knows about that area or about that person. Within the story, his job is to operate as a bomber. So in theory, he could lure you to a location and bomb you, and he can make that prediction come true through his psychic powers. And you can see this is what he tried to do when he became aware of her. He tried to lure her to a location, that way the future would be she would just walk into them and explode. But the problem was, well, Shiki's a beast. Though he can calculate the future, he had no idea that she had physical capabilities beyond human. So the multiple times that he tried to bomb her, it didn't work because she was able to just get out of the way. But in his case, if he was going against somebody that was a bit more normal or even just naive, he can even take out a magus this way. And that's why the ability itself isn't necessarily broken, because that's all he can do. Beyond that, he's just a regular human. And that goes for many psychics. They have this one particular ability, and then the rest of them is just normal human nature. So as a character, he works better as an asset rather than somebody that's on the front lines. This is the type of person that you would use to gather intel or set somebody up, as you can see, but it's still a super valuable ability nonetheless. And then the limits is that, again, it has to be within reason, and he's watching. Technically, he can't do it anymore because Shiki killed his ability with her mystic eyes. She killed the concept of future, and it took his eye out with it. But that would be the case. In that same movie, you have Shizune. She has an even higher level of precognition. So instead of calculating the future like Kamekura, she can outright predict it. It just comes to her. The limitations is that her futures can be directly affected. So if she tells somebody that the future is going to happen, and then they decide to intervene, then they can change it so they can just stop it from happening or just not end up in that area in the first place. Mifune, a fortune teller, she has precognition through divination. This is regarded by Toko as one of the highest levels of precognition that you can have, that allows her to predict tragedy with 100% accuracy. And while other psychics might need some type of background or information beforehand about the setting or the person, she just predicts them outright. But she does show us that you can lose your ability through age by the end of the story. So what does this mean for servants? If you really notice, some of them have a certain level of psychic ability too. It's one of those unspoken things. Either people don't know about it or it's happening and they don't even realize. Servants that have instinct, clairvoyance, telekinesis, all of these things are different levels of psychic ability. Emiya, Shiro, and Gilgamesh Gilgamesh, for example. Just think about the way that the Gate of Babylon and UB-Dub works. Beyond casting these weapons with just their mind, they're able to shoot them wherever they want, and just by looking at it, you might think, oh, that's something that's specific to UB-Dub, but we've literally seen that Shuro can use this outside of the marble. Same with Gilgamesh. He can manifest as many weapons as he wants at any time that he wants without touching them and shooting them with just his mind. All of that is telekinesis. When you think about Ku and his ability to control his Gaebulg with his mind, not every servant can do this. Things like levitation or flying, again, something that's not available to everybody, even the strongest servants. When you think about Gil's potential as a grand caster and his clairvoyance to see into the future, and how he normally doesn't have it active because he literally said that he doesn't want to abuse it. Same thing with Xiang Yu, as we've seen with Lost Belt 3. He can predict the future. He literally has an A-rank skill called future prediction, and the way that his ability works is very similar to Kamekura. So essentially, Nasu basically showed us Kamekura's ability if it were put into a servant. All Tsiah has to do is study his location, and he can also calculate the future to a certain level. This is something that makes him extremely formidable as a servant in his own right, because this ramps up even more when he's in combat. He can calculate what you're about to do, and not only that, but what he needs to do to avoid getting hit. And it's not like instinct where you just have this gut feeling about what's about to happen. No, he knows exactly what you're about to do. He essentially knows what you're gonna do before you do. So in order to even go against him, you would have to go in with a clear mind or fight him in a way that you normally wouldn't. When he pulled up on us in LB3, he took on Mordred, Da Vinci, Sherlock, Spartacus, Mash, Naja, and Jinka at the same time. That's 7 people, and he said the threat level was minimal. This is some sick work. Even Da Vinci admitted that he just let us go. You have Kirei's daughter, Karin. She was born with ESP circuits throughout her body. She has the unique ability that allows her to feel the same thing as demons on a spiritual level. And as a part of the church, this made her an extremely valuable asset to them, because by doing this, she can locate demons that are nearby. So in terms of someone needing to be exorcised, or if you need to know a demon's whereabouts and you can't find them, you can just bring her. And while we're on her, just because somebody has psychic ability doesn't mean that the person before them had it also. I mentioned that she has ESP circuits, but Kirei has no psychic abilities that we know of whatsoever. And this is because they can outright skip generations. Now, they could have come from her mother, but it'll be a long time before we find out, because her background has no distinction. Now, earlier I mentioned that there are some people that can further reinforce their psychic ability through Magecraft, but the psychic ability has to be present to begin with. This is what happened with Asuka. She became one of the students of Toko, and she has the ability of pyrokinesis, but she was only really able to draw this out when Toko gave her a mystic code, this being a magical glove. And so through the reinforcement of the glove, she's able to snap out flames simply through her ESP circuits. So this glove wouldn't just work for everybody. It's something that's specifically catered to her. So the same way Sion has bad magic circuits, she's still able to have an output that's very similar to actual Magecraft.